Welcome to Bled Talk, the podcast where insightful conversations meet language learning. I'm your host, Samuel Bledsoe, and on this show, we dive deep into a variety of topics with fascinating guests from all walks of life. Whether you're an English learner looking to sharpen your language skills, or simply someone who enjoys thought-provoking discussions, Bled Talk is something for you. From engaging interviews to solo episodes filled with knowledge and inspiration, join us as we explore the world one conversation at a time. Get ready for a journey of learning, curiosity, and meaningful dialogues. Welcome to Bled Talk. Welcome, everybody. This week on Bled Talk, we are here with Anna Rose, and she is from the UK. She is currently living in Rio, and she has taught English. She is a really big influencer on Instagram and TikTok, and she has YouTube as well. So please go and find her. I'll have all of her links in the description below so you guys can go follow her. She even has an English course that you guys can do if you want to. And I imagine through your social media platforms, they can find that really easily. So that'll be awesome. But I want to thank you first for coming on to the show. And I would like to really just start by knowing your story. Kind of tell us how did you get here? You know, how did you decide to come to Brazil and live in Rio?
So first, I'd like to thank you for having me on your podcast. It's really lovely to be able to chat to you finally. I've been living in Brazil, in Rio, for 8 years now, so it's quite a long time. Obviously, there's a big backstory to it. So when I was a teenager, I wanted to learn like another language, which wasn't like a language which everyone speaks, like French or Spanish or German. And I always used to visit Portugal with my family. So I was like, you know what? I'm going to learn Portuguese. And everyone was like, you're crazy. That's so like difficult. But I'd never been to Brazil before, but I'd started learning Portuguese like by myself in my room when I was a teenager. And had always had that dream to come to Brazil and like put what I knew into practice and everything. So my mom, she was like, you're not going to Brazil. There's no way you're going to Brazil. And that was like 16 at the time. So when I was 18, or I think it was 18, they had the Olympic Games in Rio. So I was like, Mom, I'm going to the Olympic Games and you cannot stop me. It was like an excuse sort of to come to Brazil. So I worked at the Olympic Games. Well, not worked, volunteered at the Olympic Games. And that was basically when I first came to Brazil and I was able to practice Portuguese. And yeah, that's basically how I arrived here.
Oh, that's awesome. And how did you decide to stay, right? Because it sounds like your mom wasn't too thrilled that you came to Brazil in the first place. What let you stay in Brazil?
Well, after I'd actually arrived, like my family, they were like sort of like breathed. They were like, oh, it's fine. Like she's fine. I think it's like the initial anxiety. Sometimes like Brazil has a bit of bad media coverage. And none of my family had ever been to Brazil, so they were all a bit like scared about maybe like what happened. But I think when I actually got here and was like sending them pictures and they were hearing about my time here, they sort of like relaxed a bit about it. So basically I decided to stay because I wanted to get better at Portuguese. So I enrolled myself into, I think, a year course in a Portuguese school. And obviously I was still like very young. I was 19. So I'd saved up in the UK to spend a year or so traveling and doing, having me at freedom. And I decided to spend that year learning Portuguese in Brazil. So that's basically was the first year. And then I opened my charity in 2017. So I have a charity which teaches kids English and squash, which is a sport. So basically just like fell in love with that work and sort of did everything possible to make that happen, that I would stay here doing that and continue doing something that I love doing. So
Yeah,
that was basically the story of how I wanted to stay here.
right. No, that's awesome. And how did you go about starting a charity? You know, that sounds like a monumental task that is very difficult to do. You know, if you came to me and you said, Sam, let's go start a charity, I'll be like, I have no idea what needs to be
No,
done.
no, no,
So did you already have experience with charity work before, or was it
no.
just something that you were like, this is what I'm gonna do?
It wasn't really like any sort of initial plan when I sort of set it up. Basically, I wanted to make like a squash school, so like the sport when junior players, and then I thought, like, wow, like there's so many kids that could benefit from playing like, and squash in Brazil is like completely like elite sport. Like it's not very
But
accessible to many people as it is in the UK, for example. So I thought, wow, we have to mix the two together, like make a squash school with kids that could really benefit from playing sport and getting out of the house and off the streets and not involved in any sort of violence. So,
kind
and
of
then
give them a sanctuary, right? Some place to be safe.
yeah, well, the kids that go there, it's basically like their second home. Like they come straight from school and then only leave where I my charity at like night. So it's just like seeing them happy and like being able to like change their lives as well. It's like really rewarding in a way. So yeah, that was the idea of making the charities like you're involving those kids. But if you want to get funding and stuff, you need to be registered charity. So that's why I registered it to be able to apply for grants, and then it just taken off now. So
No, that's
kind of rewarded.
okay. So would you say does your charity focus mostly on squash, or does it also like, and then English is kind of the second part, or is it
Yeah.
pretty even both sides?
So it it is divided. So like you can't do one. The kids can't do one or the other. Like they have to do a language and squash. They can't just do languages or they can't just do squash. So it is quite divided. However, we do have some kids that are taking off in squash and will be professional players. Like we give them more of an opportunity to play tournaments and train more, if you know what I mean.
Yeah.
So that's basically and when I first started the charity, we had no fundings at all. So I was teaching all the English lessons. It was it was a good time.
Yeah. And
Really.
did you have any experience teaching English before that, or was it
Um,
kind of your first start to everything?
that was basically the start of everything. Like we wanted to make the squash school, and then we figured out, well, I'm from England, we could teach them English as well, the kids, and integrate that into the program. So I started teaching them English, and then basically, as living in Brazil as well, like my charity had never made money from that at the beginning, and so I obviously needed to make money. So I became an English teacher, as a lot of foreigners do when they come to Brazil.
Uh-huh.
It's quite an easy option for work, isn't it? If you need something quickly, and actually like loved teaching when I first started, and I used to give lessons like to people who work in companies. So I'd go there on their lunch breaks and give them English lessons, one-on-one. And then during the pandemic, it all turned like online, where it's just like when I decided to actually made my Instagram account to help out my students who were doing like one-on-one classes, to give them like tips and stuff. So that's how that was started as well.
Okay, cool. So because of the pandemic, you kind of had the birth of your Instagram channel, and everything just kind of took off from there. But
Yeah.
did you have like a video that just did really well, and that's what gave you, or has it always been kind of like steady growth?
Well, there has been a few videos, but you know, I never had any intention of having a big channel, or like it was never like in my vision of like that could
Right.
possibly happen. So like, you know, like just like used to just post things for my students to know, to like see and stuff. But then I like teaching English with music. I always have done. So even in my one-on-one lessons, I used to get up a song and teach my students through music, because I think it is a really fun way to learn.
Okay.
So one of the first videos that I did that went viral is me translating lyrics basically, and I think it's quite easy to watch. And then after that, you just get a bit more confident and start telling stories about your experience in Brazil as a foreigner and stuff, and it just goes from there. And then you sort of see that people were interacting with you, and then you have, oh, I can grow this channel. This is really cool. So,
I think it's interesting how people they just want to know, right? You start sharing little things that you kind of do, and people just really like it, right? They like to look at it. They like to know what you think. I know everybody's always done the little question boxes, right, on their stories, and you always, ask me anything, and people always ask about, what are your opinions of Brazil, and what was something weird to you, and those kind of things, which actually kind of leads me to my next question, which is, for you, was it easy to adapt to the culture here, or was there any difficulties for you along the road?
I think as a person, I am quite very relaxed in sort of way that I sort of can adapt myself into a lot of different situations. I'm not a precious person who doesn't, it's too hot or it's too cold, or can sort of adapt into most situations, and I'm not, nothing really phases me that much. So I adapted into sort of a lot of things, even if it's quite different, or if there's something that I didn't want to eat, or someone would just politely say no, I'm okay. But I think the hardest thing that I've probably had to adapt to is the being late, probably, punctuality. It's I'm British, so that is something that is quite drilled into us since we're really young. You can't be late, and if you're late, there's always a punishment, isn't there? You get detention, or just for being 5 minutes late is unacceptable. So here in Brazil, it's I wouldn't say in a professional sense, I'd say more in a relaxed sense outside of work, that Brazilians are a bit more relaxed about timings.
It's the whole, you schedule a party for 6:30 so that everybody comes at 7, right? The whole that kind of thing.
But sometimes it can be ridiculous. Sometimes you arrange to have a coffee, and so I'll go to the beach, and they just don't turn up, or they're saying that they've left the house and they haven't, and that's just I've had that quite a lot of times here. Especially I live in Rio, and I think Rio is probably a bit worse as well for maybe late and being late and stuff, compared to maybe the south of Brazil. But it's quite that's probably one of the, I'm used to it now, but it's not something that I'd ever adapt to 100%, I don't think.
Yeah, I think sometimes what I tell my students a lot of times, or just people who ask me in general, because I'm somebody who is very I observe a lot. I like to kind of just see what everybody's doing and see what's happening. And I'm also not somebody who starts complaining about everything and things like that. But I do notice differences, people ask me about cultural differences, and I'm not afraid to say something and people be like, oh, well, that's, that's wrong, or this is this. And I'm like, no, I think sometimes there's cultural differences, right? There's things that are just different. It doesn't mean that it's bad or that it's good. It's just different.
Different way.
Yeah. And so for example, in the US, something for us, at least, it's very, very important is that when you talk to somebody, you wait until that person finishes speaking, and then you talk, right? And then you...
Yes.
And here in Brazil, I've had some people tell me that oh, that's rude. It's rude to cut people off, but it's not. It's not rude. It's normal. It's the way that you talk, and it's one of those things that it's not it's rude to cut someone off when they're in the middle of something, but you have to listen and be like, okay, they're finished. And then you go in and cut. because if you don't, they will keep talking and talking and talking, and there won't be a finish, a finish line for you to be able to be like, okay, now I can talk, right? And so for me, that was really difficult in the beginning because I couldn't talk. Like I would sit there and I would wait, and the person would keep talking and talking and talking, and then you can tell that the people are waiting for you to cut them off, right? They're like, when is this guy going to talk? I guess I'll just keep talking until until he cuts me off. And so that was something. And I tell people, I'm like, I don't think that that's bad. It's just something that's very different from where I'm
Different.
from. And so I think that I agree with you. I think sometimes there's things that you get used to it, but you don't fully accept it, or maybe the other way around. You accept it, you just don't ever get super used to it. And
Yeah.
like, how was the food difference for you whenever you came here? Because I don't know if you know what the whole world says about UK seasonings and things like that.
Yeah. So I love Brazilian food. I think it's fantastic, like rice and beans and just like staple dishes and stuff. It's really, really nice. Um, One thing I would say that I do miss about maybe the UK is like the supermarkets. I don't know if it's the same in America. I've never been to America. But in the UK, like there's just a lot more options in the supermarket for like seasonings. I know you don't like that thing, but other
They
seasonings from other
exist.
countries and like uh if like here they'll have like one type of this, and in the UK there'll be 50 types of something. So it's like then I just miss sometimes like practicality of some
Or like
ingredients.
the variety. I
Yeah.
When I tell people about like supermarkets, for example, something I really miss. I don't know if it's this way in Europe or like in Europe in general, but in the US, you can go to the store, they'll go to the supermarket, and there's food, but there's also clothing, and there's also medicine. There's also like almost everything that you need is in one store.
Super stuff.
And yeah, like the superstores, I guess. And they're super common in the US. So like here, if I want to buy medicine, I need to go to a pharmacy and
Nah.
ask for that medicine. And so if I need to get medicine and I also need to get hot dogs, like I have to places.
Yeah.
Whereas in the States, it was just, I would go to Walmart and there you go. So yeah, I think that's something. Is there anything else that you miss from the UK? Like not because Brazil maybe doesn't like
No,
do
like food in Brazil, I think it's like a
like
process. Like you have to make the beans, and it's not like so practical on like everyday basis, compared to the UK where you can eat quickly. It might not be healthy, but it's still like a bit more practical. Like here, if you want spinach, you have to like take all the leaves off the spinach. Like in the UK, it's just in spinach bag, okay?
right, right.
So that's like just some practical things. But if I miss, I
Mm.
don't know, like maybe just like some general things from the supermarket that you don't have here, maybe from even other places outside of the UK,
Yeah.
probably.
Do you get to go back to the UK often? I know you were just there a few weeks ago, but like,
Yes.
is that something you do every year or like?
That is something that now I didn't do for maybe like the first 5 years. So I went on and off like every other year or every year and a half, and then COVID hit. But now I am trying to go back twice a year actually. So because it's so expensive, and I never had any sort of like money to be able to do that. But now I'm like making a bit more money and getting a bit older, so I was like, yeah, I'm gonna like it's hard like spending that amount of money all the time, but it's definitely about like seeing your family and stuff and spending time with them.
Yeah, I think something like, especially talking to a lot of people who are foreigners, right?
Right.
One thing, whenever I ask them if they miss something, they always talk about how they miss their family, right? That's always the number one thing. And I think that can really be difficult because, like my family doesn't come to, they came to Brazil once, I think, one time. And that was to meet my son because he was born, and they came in after a couple months, which is understandable. But like you said, it's just so expensive. And, for like if my mom and my dad and my sister and my brother all want to come, I think that's like almost $10,000 just for the whole, or maybe
Like,
not 10,000, maybe it's like $6,000, but still, it's a lot of money, right? It's a lot of money to spend.
yeah.
And I think everybody knows that Americans don't have a lot of vacation time, and so like if they do come, it's only a week maybe, and so so much money for just a small, yeah, for just a small amount of time. And a question I have for you maybe is, uh, here in Brazil, like we were talking about it earlier, like a lot of foreigners, they come here, and when you need a job, we think of English, right? We're like, oh, we'll teach English because it's
Yeah.
their native language, and a lot of people need it and they want it. Um, how was it for you, like teaching English? Did you feel like people kind of sought you out because you were from the UK, or do you think that they just kind of they just found you because you were a native teacher and they liked that?
Oh, I definitely had some students that were wanted like a specific British teacher, for example. And I think like the fact that I speak fluent Portuguese like helps them a lot, because sometimes you're teaching beginners and that's really hard to do. You can't explain it in their native language to like what something means. So I think, yeah, definitely being British from England, definitely a lot of people um were interested in having lessons with me because of that fact. So just learning from someone who's native, and I think that's definitely helped a lot when I was
What?
first initially teaching. Yeah.
That's awesome. And so like when you got into teaching, for example, was there like a special curriculum that you found that you used, or did you kind of create your own thing, your own materials, or like how did that kind of move forward for you?
So it really depended on like the student I was teaching. So like, to be honest with you, most of my students were advanced speakers. Um, but I did normally follow the Oxford books.
Right.
I think they're called New English File books from Oxford. They're really, really fantastic books. But to be honest with you, a lot of my more advanced speaker students just wanted to improve their conversation
They don't,
skills because they had everything that they needed to know in their head, but like to put it into
yeah.
practice. That was more of the problem. But yeah, mainly use Oxford materials, but a lot of time it was conversation lessons, and I'd pick a topic and plan out the lesson before. Um, but to be honest, my lessons were like extremely personalized, like depending on who was the
Yeah.
student.
I didn't.
Um,
Yeah.
extremely personalized. Like I never followed like one specific model, because I found like some students would just engage so much with that lesson, and then another student you couldn't get anything out of them from
Yeah.
that. So like it is like completely personalized.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's what I tell people a lot too, because sometimes, I think it's interesting when people ask about like your method or things like that, because in the US, it's interesting because a lot of people don't ask about that
Yeah,
whenever
here
it
then I'm
comes to
like,
things. They're like, what's your method? What's your price? What time? Like they come with all of the questions ready, and I love it. I think it's fantastic. And I like what you said, because I think whenever people talk about something that makes them different, right? You always see all of these people who post these videos and they're like, oh, I'll teach you English in 3 months, or I'll teach you in 6 months, or whatever. And the thing is like, I don't think that that makes you different. I think that just makes you a liar for the most part.
yeah,
But,
I'm
um,
never, like I have my English course, but I'm really hate like fake advertisement. Like I've never like promised anyone from that they're going to be fluent from doing an
right.
online course. Like that can definitely assist you, but you can't do an online course and not be practicing at the same time or studying outside of the course as
Right.
well. Like that's just like completely it's not realistic,
Exactly.
like for someone who's learned a language from scratch by myself.
Well, and
So, like,
yeah, something that's interesting is like when I talk to students and they tell me about, they're like, oh, traditional learning in Brazil doesn't work, or this and that. And I go, well, I think that it all has its place. I think some people learn really well in schools, and that helps them get to a certain level. And then private classes, most people agree that private classes are probably the best way to learn if you can afford it and if you can find a time to make it happen.
Okay.
And then online courses work for a lot of people who just don't have the availability, or the time or whatever. And so I don't like hearing people be like, oh, you don't want to do this or you don't want to do that or this doesn't work. And I'm like, no, it all works. It just works differently. I
Yeah, like
see.
you have private lessons, like you can maybe expect to learn more, be more communicative than if you did an online course where you could learn a lot of the grammatical structures and be able to understand it, but maybe not be able to like express yourself as well as you would if you were with a one-on-one teacher, for example. So a lot of it totally depends on what method you're using and like what other strategies outside of the lessons you're using as well.
Yeah. I think a lot of people sometimes they blame the teacher and they forget that they didn't study, they didn't do the rest of the work, right? They came to class and that was it. And then they're like, I'm not fluent. And it's like, well, you're not, but your teacher was telling you that you need to study, that you need to do these things.
Yeah.
Then if you don't do your part, then it's not gonna happen. It's just not gonna work. Like you said, it's not realistic. And what I even tell people sometimes is like, if you look at a lot of these teachers that come back and tell you that the traditional method doesn't work, when you see their background, like how did they learn English? They always tell you that they did school and they did some type of exchange program, maybe, or they kind of went off and did their own independent study. And I'm like, okay, so these people speak English really well. They teach it very, very well. There's no issues. Yet they teach that the way that they learn is the wrong way. And it's like, well, I don't think that there's a wrong way to learn. We just learn differently, like you said. But yeah,
Completely depends on the student, definitely. Like
yeah.
the way that they learn. So definitely agree with.
Absolutely. And do you think, for example, like living in Brazil, being a foreigner, I guess in Rio maybe it's a little different. Do you see a lot of people who are from outside of the country in Rio, or is
Um,
it mostly are you mostly with people who are from here?
so honestly, like not many people from outside of Brazil I've met here, but quite a lot of French people.
Oh, really? A lot of French people.
I've seen like obviously in Rio you see a lot of tourists, like but people who actually live here probably like have a few friends from France and um yeah, there's really not many from what I
Okay. And
know.
were you somebody that kind of looked for other expats? Like did you kind of search for people that were also from
Um,
outside of Brazil, or did you kind of try to stay away from that group so that you kind of immersed yourself more in Portuguese?
so I'm quite like someone who just goes with the flow a lot. Like I met a lot of Brazilians, and when I first arrived here as well, I was in like a few like Rio tourism groups and stuff. So I used to go hikes, and that was normally with foreign tourists. So like people who are just tourists here. But like people who actually live here, like mainly made friends with Brazilians, yeah, and a few friends.
Okay. And and was that difficult for you in the beginning, like to find like your group of people, or
Oh no.
was it easy?
Yeah, because basically, like, I play squash, so it's like a sport, and I think when you have a sport, it makes things so much easier to like you have like a place to be, and um, like you go back to the same place, and all of the same people are still there, and like sort of end up making friends through sport. So that's how I did make most of my initial friends here.
Oh, okay. No, that's cool. Yeah,
Yeah,
I
and
play a lot of basketball, and so
yeah,
like a lot of my friends that I've made here locally have been through playing basketball.
oh yeah,
Mostly Brazilians. Sometimes there's one time I met a guy from Germany. That was interesting because I did find a friend who's from the U.S. here as well, and we were
well,
talking to each other in English. And this guy comes up to us and he was like, "Why are you speaking English?" And we're like, because we're Americans." He's like, "Oh, cool. I'm from Germany," and it was a fun That's
Oh,
beach. But yeah, I like that here in Brazil. It's almost like even if you're not from Brazil, like being in Brazil gives people that power that they need to just be friendly and be open and talk to you and do that thing. Would
definitely.
you would you say that Brazil has kind of changed who you are? Like, has it made you like a better person or a different person?
Yeah, definitely has made me have to grow up faster than maybe I should have had in terms of like I've lived there since I was 18, 19. So had to grow up very fast, in a good way, like become more independent, more confident. And yeah, really like I do really like Brazilian people and like how they're really friendly and everything. And I think that's definitely impacted my own personality as well. So
Yeah,
it's
no,
really
that's awesome. That's fantastic. And do you this is a question that I get a lot. Do you think that when you learned Portuguese, did you kind of create a different personality with Portuguese? So like would you say that you're kind of a different person in English than you are in Portuguese, or would you say that now you're the same person in both languages?
um I think I've like this is a good expression. People learning English like come out my shell
Uh-huh.
or like speaking Portuguese because it seems like it feels like it's easier to like be yourself speaking another language. I
Yeah.
don't it's really weird to say that, but I feel like it is like I'm able to express myself like way more in Portuguese than in English, for example.
Oh, okay. No, that's cool. But I can see why. It's because like you came here with the goal of speaking Portuguese, of being
Yeah.
that outgoing person, you know? And so it's kind of like they don't know your past, they don't know where you're from, they don't know anything about it. And they're so interested in you, you know, they're so interested in who you are, where you're from, what you like
Yeah,
to
it gives
do,
you a
what
lot
you
of
do.
freedom.
Yeah,
Definitely,
so you can
like
just
you're
kind
able
of
to express yourself and
yeah.
uh yeah, definitely. I feel like it feels like less real as well because like in English, like it's your native language, and Portuguese, like I don't know, it's just like less real,
It's like yeah.
less
It's
pressure.
interesting. Yeah, for me, like when I learned Portuguese, I learned it in a like a church type setting. And so like my Portuguese that I learned was very I wouldn't say formal, but it was very elegant, and it was something that like it was very proper. I tried to be nice. All of my words were good words and nice
Yeah,
things. And it was really difficult to be me because I'm a churchy person. I'm religious, but I I'm also a very I don't know how to say it without being like making myself sound bad, but like I don't know, like I'm a dirty person, if that makes sense. Like I like to make jokes, I like to have fun, and I didn't know how to do that in Portuguese in the beginning,
okay,
you know.
okay. So
I
you,
because I was somebody who was very expressive. Like in the US, I would if somebody said something, I would be sarcastic and I would do this and I would do these things. And in Portuguese I wasn't because I didn't know how to do it. I didn't
yeah,
know how
once
to
you like
be
if you did that in the same way as you spoke English, like
yeah.
no one
And it's
can.
and it's funny because like people they don't think that American humor is funny here. they don't
About yeah,
they don't like our humor. And so I had to learn a new humor. I had to learn a new thing and kind of see how to get people to react to that. And it's not like I studied comedy and tried to be more funny. No, but like I wanted to be able to make jokes and see people laugh, but I needed to do it in Portuguese. And so I think after
yeah,
I got married, I was able to learn the vocabulary that maybe I wasn't supposed to use when I was a missionary, but the vocabulary that people use to talk to each other. And I started to understand their jokes. They started to understand mine, and it just
yeah,
kind of it got better. And so I think at first you kind of create two different personalities, but then over time they merge and kind of become one thing because I don't think that I'm the same as I was before I spoke Portuguese.
no,
Even in English, it's different. And And what do you, so, well, let me think of how to phrase this question, right? If you had to tell somebody, Brazilian or American or British person, whoever, um, if you had to tell someone who's moving to a new country, kind of like what to do, they're going to a new place, new language, like what advice would you give them?
I would definitely just say, just go for it. Like, don't go with any hesitation, because it's definitely something that, it's an experience that will completely change your life, whether you're going for a few months or end up living there. Like, it's an experience that will teach you so much. Um, but go in with an open mind, be as social as possible, try and make as like many friends as possible, and learn as much as you can on the way, I guess. And just jump into it. I think it's definitely something that I say to a lot of people that are have hesitation about, especially like people who are like 18 or 19 going away, or just do it. Like, I think it's
Yeah,
has
just
to
go.
be. Yeah.
It's something that I think like in the beginning is scary, but then after you just do it. Because I was about, I think I was 19 when I left in the US and I came to Brazil for the first time too. So I was about the same age as you. And, even though I had like a different reason for being here, it was very similar to the whole like I had to grow up, right? I had to be an adult, even though I didn't feel like I was an adult. And yeah, definitely, I think it builds character. It makes you a lot better, a much more well-rounded, I would say like world citizen, like I think moving to another country, it just makes you more aware of the things that are happening. Because like you said, Brazil gets such a bad rep
Yeah.
on like on the news and other places. But then you come here and it's like, where is it? Right? Where's all of the bad things that I saw?
Representative.
It's really a great place to be. And lastly, we're getting close to the end, unfortunately, because it's been fun. But what advice would you give someone who's learning a new language specifically? Because a lot of people who are listening, they're learning English. Um, and
Yeah.
you came here and studied Portuguese and kind of, I would say mastered it. You're in a really good spot. You've been speaking it for 8 years and super comfortable with it. How do you get there? And what's the thing, like if you could go back and tell yourself and be like, oh no, this is how you need to do it. Like, what would you say?
I say like the number one thing is like, do not be afraid to make mistakes. Um, that's the one thing I think that will take like your language learning skills to the next level. Like, really just like talk to people without like getting embarrassed. Like, oh, I'm too scared to say that word in case I say it wrong. Like, you are going to say things wrong. Like, there is no way around that. There's no way around saying it word perfectly when you're first learning. And I see a lot of people actually like who trying to learn English, but then after years and years and years, never managing to learn it because they don't want to talk and they're too scared of talking and getting embarrassed. But there's no way around that. Like, you have to get stuck in. Um, talk to as many people as possible, and yeah, just get as involved as you possibly can in conversation and the practical part of it.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. That is a fantastic thing to say. That's a really good advice and counsel, I think, as just to get into it. I like that you said that actually, that there's so many people who they study for years and years and years, but they can't talk. I mean, it's not that they can't talk, right? It's that they don't talk. They don't want to, right?
And
They're afraid.
sometimes they're never gonna get better because that's the next step that's stopping them. Because there does come a time when you're learning a language which you do have to leave the books and the grammar, and you
Right.
have to go to the communication side of it. So I do see that often. Like, we don't want to talk. Like, it's gonna be really, really hard to
Right. It's
start.
going to be, yeah, it's going to be difficult to get out if you don't do what you have to do. There's no way around it. But yeah, no, that's awesome. And I thank you so much for coming on to the episode and for all of the stories and advice that you gave. It was wonderful. I'm so happy that you were able to do that. And everybody who's listening, if you have any questions or anything for us, you can comment them. You can follow us on social media and send us a message, and we'll get back to you as soon as we can. And who knows, maybe in the future, if you want to, you're definitely invited to come back for a second conversation.
Part two.
Yeah, it would be fun. But thank you so much. Do you have anything that you want to say before we go?
Yes, I'd like to say to everyone, don't give up on your English learning. Even when it gets tough, keep going, because you're definitely going to be able to learn. And it's gonna, just don't give up, basically. Yeah.
That's awesome. Fantastic. Thank you. Well, everybody have a wonderful week, and we will see you next time on Bled Talk. See you later. Thank you for listening to Bled Talk. Don't forget to subscribe and follow us for more content. We are on all of the popular podcast platforms like Spotify, Apple Podcast, and we're even on YouTube. Don't forget to send in your questions and your suggestions. Thank you once again, and have a great day.